Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something avoidants will never post about, never admit in a text, and rarely even confess to themselves. They don't just regret losing the one that got away. They deeply, quietly regret losing the people who lived and loved in a very specific way. There is a very specific kind of person an avoidant never truly gets over, even if they run, even if they detach, even if they pretend you were too much. It's the person who actually said what they felt and what they needed instead of playing the cool, unbothered character just to be liked. You have to understand how rare that is in their world. Most people sense the distance and go quiet. They feel the inconsistency but pretend it's fine. They're terrified of losing the connection, so they bury their truth and perform chill, because they think that's what will keep the avoidant close. You didn't do that, or at least not for long. You were the one who opened your mouth and said, "Something doesn't feel right. I care about you, but I'm not okay with this." In the moment, your honesty probably felt like a threat to them. When you said, "I feel anxious when you disappear," their system heard, "You're failing." When you said, "I need more consistency," their system heard, "You're not enough." When you asked, "What are we doing? What are we building here?" their system heard, "You're being trapped." Avoidant nervous systems are wired to equate emotional responsibility with danger, so they often react with shutdown, defensiveness, or irritation when someone holds up a mirror. That doesn't mean your honesty was wrong. It means you touched the very thing they spend their whole life trying not to look at. Here's the part that comes later, when the noise has died down and you're no longer there to explain everything. Your words stay. They remember that you didn't just vibe with them. You tried to build something with them. You were the one who noticed the emotional elephant in the room and pointed at it. You were the one who didn't just take whatever crumbs they offered and call it a feast. You took the risk of being truly seen as too sensitive or too emotional because you valued reality over performance. That risk is the very thing their ego hated in the moment and the very thing their heart respects in the silence. Think of how most relationships around them go. People play roles. They flirt, they hook up, they hang out, they skim the surface. When things get uncomfortable, they ghost each other or slide back into small talk. You disrupted that pattern by saying things like, "I want depth. I want clarity. I want emotional honesty." That made them uncomfortable, yes, because it pulled them out of their survival mode. But that's exactly why you become unforgettable. Anyone can make them feel desired. Few people make them feel challenged to grow. Your truth-telling also gave them something priceless, a clear emotional map of what was actually happening. You named your anxiety instead of acting it out. You said, "When you don't reply for days, I feel pushed away," instead of turning cold and distant in return. You said, "I need to feel like I matter," instead of playing games to test if you did. At the time, they might have rolled their eyes, called you dramatic, or shut down. But later, when other people come into their life and repeat the same complaints you had, "You're distant. I feel alone with you. I don't know where I stand." It is your voice that echoes the loudest, because you were there first and you were honest. Avoidants regret losing the person who told the truth because that person becomes their reference point. They may find others who are easier, quieter, more agreeable, but they don't find the same level of emotional clarity. With you, there was a roadmap. If they had ever chosen to follow it, they would have known exactly what to work on. They would have known what you needed to feel safe: consistency, communication, presence. They didn't take that road back then, but the clarity you gave them doesn't disappear just because they avoided it. It waits for them in their own memory. And here's something you probably haven't given yourself credit for. Speaking your truth was an act of love, not an attack. You didn't call out their behavior because you wanted to shame them. You did it because you wanted a real connection with them. You wanted to meet the actual person behind the defenses and have them meet you. You wanted a relationship that could handle honest conversations without collapsing. That desire comes from a deep, courageous heart. In the moment, they may have experienced it as pressure. When you're gone, They eventually recognize it for what it was, an invitation to intimacy they didn't know how to accept. Will they ever tell you that? Maybe not. Avoidants often process regret in private. They rationalize publicly and feel quietly. But when life brings them contrast, when they are with people who never say what they mean, who sulk instead of speaking, who leave without explanation, they feel the loss of the one person who actually tried to bridge the gap with words. That person is you. So if you're replaying every conversation, wondering if you were stupid for being so open, for saying, I love you, first, for asking for more, for admitting, I'm not okay like this, you weren't stupid. You were being exactly the kind of person their soul needed, even if their defenses rejected it at the time. They don't deeply regret losing the ones who lied about how they felt to keep the peace. They regret losing the one who was brave enough to say, I care about you. This hurts, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't just to keep you comfortable. That level of honesty is rare. And even if they never tell you, a part of them will always remember that you were the one who loved them enough to tell the truth. A lot of people talk about boundaries, but very few actually live them. And that's exactly why avoidants deeply regret losing the person who does. In the beginning, you might have been like everyone else, explaining, warning, threatening to leave if things didn't change, saying sentences like, I can't do this anymore, or if you disappear again, I'm done, while still picking up the phone when they called, still replying instantly when they reappeared, still letting them back into your bed and heart without any real repair. To their nervous system, those boundaries didn't register as real. They were emotional storms that always passed. The avoidant quietly learned, they're upset, but they'll stay. I don't actually have to change. Everything changes the first time you mean it. The first time you don't answer that late night breadcrumb after days of silence. The first time you say, no, that doesn't work for me, and you don't follow it with a paragraph of justification and apologies. The first time you say, I love you, but I will not stay in this dynamic. And instead of using that love as a reason to stay, you let it be the truth you carry with you as you walk away. That is the moment their system feels something new, something it is not used to feeling from you, consequence. For an avoidant, consequence is not you yelling, crying, or over-explaining. They can tune that out, label it as drama, and retreat deeper into their shell. Consequence is when your behavior stops matching their old script. The script that says they can disappear for a week, come back with a half-hearted, and get your full heart again. The script that says they can dismiss your feelings in the moment because you will eventually swallow them to keep the peace. The script that says they can avoid every uncomfortable conversation and still enjoy the benefits of emotional intimacy with you. When you set a boundary and keep it, you rip that script up quietly but completely. In the moment, their ego might react badly. They might accuse you of being selfish, cold, or different now. They might say you're overreacting or call you controlling because it's easier than admitting they've gotten used to a version of you who accepted the unacceptable. But beneath the defensiveness, beneath the sarcasm and shutdown, a deeper truth is landing. They are no longer the one in charge of how this story goes. You are. Your boundary takes back the pen you kept putting in their hand, hoping they would write you a better chapter. Now you're writing it with your actions, and here's what stings them the most over time. You didn't set a boundary to punish them. You set a boundary to protect you. You didn't disappear to get a reaction. You stepped back because staying was hurting you more than leaving. You didn't stop replying instantly to play games. You stopped because you realized you have a life that deserves your full presence. That kind of boundary is powerful because it isn't about manipulating their behavior. It's about respecting your own nervous system. They feel that difference, even if they can't put it into words. Avoidants regret losing the person who lives their boundaries because that person becomes the first real mirror they've had in a long time. When you say, I won't accept disappearing acts, and then you don't, they are forced to see that their patterns have a cost. When you say, I need consistency, and then you step away when you don't get it, they are forced to see that intimacy is not something they can have on their terms only. When you say, I can't keep doing this, and you actually stop, they are forced to confront the reality that people who love them can still leave if they refuse to grow. Later, when they move on and repeat the same patterns with someone else, they start to feel the difference. Some people will tolerate the inconsistency longer. Some will play the same game of threats with no action, but the memory of you, the one who drew a line and honored it, doesn't fade. They remember that you didn't just complain about their behavior. You recalibrated your life around what you needed. They remember that your no more was not a tantrum. It was a turning point. They remember that you were willing to lose them in order not to lose yourself again. That's why the regret runs deep. They didn't just lose someone who loved them. They lost someone who had the courage to love themselves enough to leave when it wasn't healthy. You showed them, by example, what self-respect looks like in motion. You showed them that closeness without responsibility is not real intimacy, it's convenience. They may never admit it out loud, but there will be moments when they think back to the day your words and your actions finally matched, and a quiet thought will hit them. I should have taken that seriously. I should have met them there. By then, you will be busy honoring the very boundary that made you unforgettable to them. The one that said, I will not stay where I have to abandon myself to be loved. There comes a point in your story where something inside you quietly snaps, and it's not the kind of break that destroys you. It's the kind that finally sets you free. Up until that moment, all your energy has been pointed outward, toward them, toward their silence, their moods, their distance, their inconsistency. You wake up scanning your phone for their name. You go to sleep replaying every word they said. Your mind is a 24,007 detective, trying to decode what they meant, why they pulled away, whether you did something wrong. You're not just in a relationship with a person, you're in a relationship with a question. How do I get them to come close and stay? And that question drains you more than any argument ever could. Every time they back away, you lean in harder. They take one step back, you take 3 steps forward. They send a dry message, you send a paragraph. They disappear, you check their profile, ask mutual friends, send a gentle, "Hey, are you okay?" They give mixed signals. You sit up at night trying to untangle them like a riddle with a prize at the end. Your nervous system is constantly reaching, constantly chasing, constantly in motion around their stillness. Without realizing it, you've made them the center of your emotional universe, and your own needs have become background noise. The turning point doesn't always come in some big dramatic scene. Sometimes it comes on an ordinary day, when you read an unanswered message for the 10th time, or you see they were online and didn't respond, or you realize you've spent yet another afternoon in a mental conversation they are not even part of. Something inside you whispers, I can't live like this anymore. Not, I can't live without them, but I can't live without me. That's the quiet beginning of all real healing, the moment your energy starts to shift direction. At first, stopping the chase feels wrong. It feels like giving up, like failing, like you're betraying your love for them. You're used to measuring love by how much effort you pour into keeping the connection alive, even when it's one-sided. So when you don't send the extra text, when you don't respond instantly, when you don't ask for reassurance again, your body panics. Your brain screams, do something. Don't just sit here. What if they forget you? What if they move on? What if this is your last chance? That's the withdrawal talking. You're detoxing from the addiction of being the emotional pursuer. This is where turning your energy inward looks less like a spiritual Instagram quote and more like moment-by-moment courage. Instead of texting them when the achy hits, you write it out in a journal. Instead of stalking their social media, you go for a walk and feel the urge move through you like a wave without acting on it. Instead of obsessively analyzing their last message with friends, you start asking different questions. What do I feel right now? What do I need? What is this pattern doing to me? You realize you've spent months, maybe years, studying them, and you barely know yourself. As you redirect that energy, you slowly begin to build a life that does not orbit their moods. You get curious about your own attachment wounds. You learn about why you chase, why you overgive, why you panic when someone pulls away. You see that this story started long before them, that you've been trying to prove your worth to emotionally distant people since you were young. Therapy, books, podcasts, honest conversations with yourself become your new pursuit. You're still longing, you're still hurting, but the focus is shifting from how do I get them to how do I heal me? On the outside, it might look simple. Maybe you don't answer right away when they send a half-hearted, "Hey." Maybe you stop rearranging your plans for their last-minute invitations. Maybe you say, "I'm not available for this dynamic anymore." And then you back that sentence with distance, not more convincing. On the inside, these small choices are seismic. Each time you choose yourself over the urge to chase, you send a new message to your own nervous system. My needs matter. My peace matters. My life is bigger than this one person's ambivalence. Avoidants deeply regret losing this version of you, even if they don't show it. When you were constantly chasing, they never had to fully feel your absence. You were always there energetically. Even when you threatened to leave, they could lean on the comfort of knowing that if they ever wanted attention, affection, validation, all they needed to do was reappear. When you stop feeding that pattern and turn inward, the background hum of your energy disappears from their life. They check your profile and see less engagement. They send a small message and feel your distance. They sense, without you saying much, that your world no longer spins around them. That's when regret creeps in for them, not because you finally perfected yourself into someone worthy of love, but because they finally feel the loss of the person who once poured everything into them and then chose to pour that same devotion into themselves. You become the one that stands out in their memory as different from the rest, not because you chased the hardest, but because you had the courage to stop. You didn't just love them, you learned to love you. And that shift is exactly what their nervous system will remember long after the chat is archived. One of the deepest reasons an avoidant can't quite erase you from their system is because you did something most people around them never do. You saw their wounds clearly, but you refused to turn yourself into their emotional parent. From the very beginning, you weren't blind. You noticed the flinch in their eyes when conversations got deep. You felt the tension in their body when you talked about commitment, labels, the future. You saw the way they shut down when emotions got too big, how they'd suddenly go cold or distant after a moment of real closeness. And instead of just taking it personally and calling them a monster, you looked deeper. You asked yourself, where is this coming from? What happened to them before me? You understood, consciously or intuitively, that this was not just stubbornness or cruelty. It was defense. You saw the frightened kid inside the grown body. Because you saw that child, you softened in ways other people wouldn't. You watched your words. You tried not to overwhelm them. You learned to approach hard conversations with gentleness. You gave space when they were flooded. You reached out when they were quiet. You tried your hardest to be a safe place. You read about attachment trauma, nervous systems. You connected the dots between their history and their habits, and your heart expanded with compassion. You weren't just reacting to their behavior. You were trying to love the damaged, hidden parts of them that no one else had ever taken the time to understand. That alone made you rare. Most people either demonize or idealize avoidance. You humanize them. But at some point, painfully, you realized compassion has a line. You started to notice that the more you understood their pain, the less they had to take responsibility for it. Every time you said, "I know you shut down because you're scared," it became easier for them to keep shutting down instead of learning another way. Every time you said, "I know you need space," even when it ripped your chest open, it became easier for them to instead of leaning in. Slowly, without meaning to, you had slid into the role of caretaker, coach, therapist, parent. You were regulating their emotions, managing their triggers, reading their moods, adjusting yourself constantly so they wouldn't feel overwhelmed, all while nobody was doing that for you. The turning point was when you realized that understanding someone's wounds does not mean you live under the shrapnel forever. You can know that they're terrified of intimacy and still admit, it is not fair that I am the one absorbing the cost of that terror. You can know their childhood was chaotic and still say, I do not have to let chaos run my adult life. You can see how hard it is for them to stay present and still decide, I deserve a partner who actually shows up. That's when you stepped out of the parent role. Not by shutting off your empathy, but by refusing to let empathy be the excuse for your own self-abandonment. You stopped explaining them to themselves more than they were willing to understand themselves. You stopped giving them passes for vanishing, for stonewalling, for refusing accountability, simply because you knew where it came from. You started saying sentences like, I know this is hard for you and I'm not judging you, but this still doesn't work for me. You took your hands off their side of the equation and put them back on your own. Your love stayed soft, but your boundaries turned firm. You stopped trying to rescue the frightened child inside them while ignoring the frightened child inside you, the one who was exhausted, confused, and tired of carrying both of your emotional loads. Avoidants regret losing the person who could see their wounds with that level of depth because it made them feel uniquely seen. You decoded patterns no one else ever named. You gave language to their shutdowns. You didn't call them heartless when they pulled away. You recognized the fear underneath. That feels like oxygen to someone whose whole life has been spent being misread. But what haunts them later is not just that you saw them, it's that you eventually refused to keep doing the job their own healing work is supposed to do. You stepped out of the role of emotional parent, and that left them alone with themselves in a way they are not used to. There will be nights when they remember how you used to say, I get it, I know why you do this, and also how you finally said, but I won't keep letting it hurt me. That combination is what makes you unforgettable. Anyone can judge them. Anyone can excuse them. Very few people can hold both truths at once the way you did. I see your pain, and I still choose my peace. That is the energy that quietly changes a person over time, even if they pretend it doesn't. You were not the one who abandoned them. You were the one who refused to abandon yourself for them. And deep down, in the space where their regrets live, that distinction is crystal clear. One of the most powerful shifts you ever made in that connection was the moment you stopped seeing things in black and white. You stopped needing to decide if they were a villain or a victim, and you started holding both truths at the same time. You understood their trauma, and you still refused to let their unhealed behavior destroy your peace. That is an advanced form of love most people never reach. In the beginning, you swung between extremes. When you were in pain, you told yourself, they're heartless, they don't care, they're just cruel. And when you were in compassion, you told yourself, they're broken, they're wounded, I need to be more patient, I need to understand more, I need to give more. You were trying to choose a single story because it felt safer to either blame them completely or excuse them completely. But neither of those stories was the whole truth, and deep down you knew it. So you started to see the layers. You saw the shutdowns, the disappearances, the distance, and instead of only feeling rejected, you also saw the scared child in them. The one who learned on that closeness equals danger, that vulnerability equals humiliation, that emotions equal chaos. You began to understand that their avoidance was an old survival strategy, not a personal attack on your worth. That realization softened something in you. Your anger turned into empathy. Your desire for revenge turned into a desire to help. And for a while, you used that empathy as a reason to stay, as a reason to tolerate more than your nervous system could handle. They had a rough childhood. They're traumatized. They shut down because they're scared. I can't just walk away from that. You told yourself, and every time your heart broke, you patched it with one more explanation. But there came a day when your body refused to let you keep doing that. Your chest stayed tight, your sleep stayed broken, your mind stayed looped, and you realized that understanding why someone hurts you doesn't magically make it healthy to keep standing there. You sat with a hard truth. Yes, they are wounded, and yes, I am bleeding. That's when the second truth rose up beside the first one. My empathy for their trauma does not cancel out my right to feel safe, seen, and respected. You stopped using their pain as a reason to abandon your own. You stopped saying, "Get it, so I guess I have to live with it." And you started saying, "I get it, and I still choose not to live like this." That "and" is everything. That is where your power lies. Holding both truths meant you could still remember their backstory, still see the patterns that shaped them, without turning yourself into their emotional shield. You could say, "I know you disappear because you get overwhelmed," and in the next breath, "But I am not going to keep teaching my nervous system that disappearing is acceptable in a relationship." You could say, "I know intimacy is scary for you. And also, I am not going to keep begging for the bare minimum just to manage your fear." You stopped arguing with their wounds and started protecting your own. You stopped waiting for the day their trauma would fully heal before you allowed yourself to feel worthy of a peaceful love. That shift didn't make you colder, it made you clearer. Avoidants deeply regret losing the person who can do this, because it is so rare for someone to see their pain without collapsing under it. Most people either judge them harshly or enable them endlessly. You did neither. You were the one who could say, "I know you're not a bad person, but this behavior is bad for me." You were the one who could hold their trembling heart in one hand and your own boundaries in the other. In the moment, that made you difficult to them because your presence demanded reality, not fantasy. But later, when they look back, that is precisely what makes you unforgettable. You love them with open eyes, not denial. There is a quiet power in a person who refuses to pick between compassion and self-respect. You didn't have to demonize them to justify leaving. You didn't have to erase every good memory to validate your decision. You simply refused to sacrifice your mental, emotional, and physical well-being on the altar of understanding. You could say, "I know why you do what you do," and still walk away from the fire instead of standing in it and calling that loyalty. That's the part that haunts them, even if they never say it. Because your choice proved something their avoidance tries to deny. It proved that someone can see their deepest wounds, love them honestly, and still decide, "I won't let this version of you be the reason I abandon myself." When they think of you, they don't just remember the softness. They remember the moment you stepped into that mature, grounded clarity. They remember that you didn't slam the door with hatred. You closed it with truth. You weren't screaming, "You're a monster." You were saying, "I know you're hurting, but I am done making your hurt the center of my life." That is the line they feel under their skin, the one that says, "Your trauma explains you, but it does not excuse what your unhealed behavior did to me." And that is exactly why, in the quiet moments, the regret runs deep, because losing someone who could hold both truths is losing someone who loved them fully, without ever letting that love destroy who they are. There is a very big difference between acting like you've moved on and actually moving on in your nervous system. And avoidants feel that difference even if they never say a word about it. At first, after the connection breaks, most of what you do is a performance. You post the pictures. You share the quotes. You tell your friends, "I'm done. I'm over it," while your heart is still checking your phone in the middle of the night. You smile in public and collapse in private. You might even talk to someone new, not because you're ready, but because you're starving for proof you're still wanted. On the outside, it can look like moving on. On the inside, your body is still living in that relationship, still waiting for their name to appear, still tense, still scanning, still asking, will they come back? Avoidants are used to that phase. They count on it. They know that after a breakup or a pullback, people often try to look strong while still being emotionally hooked. So they check your page and they see the posts, the stories, the little digs or indirect quotes. They see you looking good, but they can feel the edge, the performance in it. Their nervous system relaxes a bit because underneath the show, they sense you're still there. They tell themselves, they're not really gone. This is just their way of dealing. If I ever really want to, I can go back. That belief is their emotional painkiller. It allows them to avoid feeling the full impact of losing you. But then something shifts slowly, almost invisibly at first. You get tired of performing. You get tired of pretending. You get tired of posting things to get a reaction that never really comes. You realize that every time you try to prove you're okay for their eyes, you keep them at the center of your life. So you stop. You pull your energy back from the show. You begin making changes that aren't for them to see, they're for you to feel. You start sleeping a little earlier, eating a little better, taking walks, spending time with people who don't trigger that tightness in your chest. You cry when you need to instead of stuffing it down for the sake of looking fine. You let yourself grieve, and then slowly your grief starts to turn into growth. Your nervous system begins to recalibrate. Days go by where you don't check their profile. A morning arrives where you realize you didn't wake up with their name in your first thought. You catch yourself laughing and notice that it's real, not forced. You go somewhere that used to remind you of them, and while a flicker of memory passes through, it doesn't hijack your whole body the way it used to. This is what genuine moving on feels like. Not that you never think of them, but that thinking of them no longer drowns you. They become a chapter, not the whole book. Avoidants notice this in ways they can't fully articulate. They go to do their usual check, looking at your page, asking about you, feeling for that old emotional pull, and the signal is different. Your posts, if you even share much anymore, feel lighter, less pointed. You're not talking to them indirectly anymore. You're talking to your own life. Mutual friends mention you, and instead of hearing, they're still obsessed. They still talk about you all the time. They hear they've been focusing on work. On themselves, they seem calmer, more grounded. The energetic cord they once relied on as a safety net starts to feel thinner, weaker, less responsive. The regret they feel at this stage is not just about losing a romantic partner, it's about losing access to a rare emotional home. Because in hindsight, they remember that you were not just someone who wanted them. You were someone who saw them, tried for them, stretched for them, invited them into deeper connection. You were willing to have hard conversations, to be honest, to look at yourself too. You didn't want a situationship, you wanted a real bond. At the time, that terrified their defenses. But when you are gone, not just physically, but emotionally, they realize that kind of connection does not show up every day. They see it in contrast. They meet people who don't speak their emotional language, who are either closed off or chaotic, who don't have the same depth, the same courage, the same willingness to grow. They might even find someone easier. Someone who doesn't ask for much, someone who never challenges them. And for a while, that ease feels good. But in quiet moments, they remember the difference. They remember how alive, frustrated, seen, and triggered they felt with you. All signs that something real was happening. They didn't know how to sit in that fire. So they walked out of it. But your moving on forces them to face what they walked away from. What really haunts an avoidant is when your happiness no longer looks like a performance designed to get them back. It's when you no longer need them to see you glowing. You glow because your life is full, because you chose yourself, because you built safety inside your own body instead of begging for it from theirs. Your peace stops being a weapon and becomes your natural state. At that point, they can't comfort themselves with, "They're just doing this to make me react." Instead, they have to consider the possibility that they truly lost something precious, someone who loved them deeply, who was willing to do the work, and who then became strong enough to walk away and actually heal. They regret that. Not always in a dramatic movie scene way. Sometimes it's just a quiet ache when they see your name or hear your song. What if that doesn't go away? But by the time that regret fully ripens, you're no longer living for their realization. You've already given yourself what you were once begged from them: attention, care, consistency, safety. And that, more than anything you could say or post, is what proves they didn't just lose a lover. They lost a rare, irreplaceable opportunity for real connection with someone who now finally understands they were never the one who was disposable.